Blessed be those who play Raid Shadow Legends. Hello everyone, Bront, CatHerder here. We're having some fun talking Raid Shadow Legends, and we are here on my main, but that's not the important part. We are going to be talking about blessings. Now, there have been some videos on these beforehand. I think I've even done a video on blessings before, but we have had some new blessings added. The meta has certainly changed a little bit. Some of the blessings have been buffed, nerfed, otherwise changed. So I think that it was actually worthwhile to go over some of the blessings and talk about some of the best that you can get in every category, which champions those blessings generally really belong on, and overall just talk about how important blessings can be. Because I know we've talked about them, talked about getting blessings on champions and some of the importance in some of the dungeons, but it's actually nice to go over this and talk about this. First of all, it is worth noting that in the event dungeon, as well as Curse City and a couple of other places, the boss actually has a special ability on them to basically reduce the amount of damage that you take if you have awakening levels, or blessings as they are, and increase the amount of damage you do to the boss based on those awakening levels as well. So just from a pure doing damage standpoint, blessings can be very helpful in some PvE content. Of course, you also get stats out of them as well. And on top of that, the Phantom Shogun here actually has the mechanic where you can actually use the blessings to help bring down his counter. And if the counter gets too high, you can pretty much auto lose that fight because he starts doing more damage. He starts ignoring buffs and debuffs, starts hitting AoEs that weren't AoEs beforehand. It gets pretty gross if he gets that counter up particularly high. So blessings are certainly important for certain content and honestly help all around. So let's actually talk about what the blessings are and what they do, and then we'll certainly talk about strength a little bit as well. Okay, so first of all, we're just going to talk about blessings, and I picked one of my champions that has a 6-star blessing just to kind of highlight all the stats that you get out of this. But just keep in mind that basically the stats that you get overall are these stats down here. So once you have a 6-star blessing, you get, on a legendary at least, you get 8,500 HP, 7,500 attack, 600 defense, 38% crit damage, 75% accuracy and resistance, and 15 speed. For epics, it's only about 10 speed, and it's like 25 or 30% crit damage. The numbers are certainly lower for epics, and they're lower again for rares, but these are free stats. And you start off, you get HP to start, then you get attack, then you get defense, then you get some extra HP and crit damage, then you get the resistance and accuracy, and finally on the 6-star is where you get the speed. And all of those very, very important. So getting high level blessings can be very helpful just from a pure stats perspective. And to be fair, there are plenty of champions out there that don't really get a lot out of a lot of blessings, and as a result, it doesn't matter as much which blessing you pick. But we're going to talk about some of the blessings, and in those cases of those champions where they don't necessarily matter too much which blessings you pick, there's certain blessings that are just better in general. So we'll talk about them all. First, we're going to start with some of the rare ones, and I'm just going to go over every single rare one and talk about how good or how bad it is and what situations it might be useful. So Indomitable Spirit, for example, is a chance of blocking, stun, sleep, fear, true fear, freeze, and provoke when the champion tries to place them on this champion. So it's only got a 5 or 10% chance of blocking, up to a 30% with no cooldowns on a 6-star. Now, to be fair, notice that the 6-star has no cooldowns. All the rest of this does have a cooldown, and it's a 1-turn cooldown. This is generally not particularly good until you get to the level 30%. But there's another one that's generally just better. This would be okay if you have a rare champion that you absolutely cannot be stunned under any circumstances. It's just another way to prevent that from happening. Probably not the best defense in that particular case, but it's an option. Miracle Heal allows you to restore max HP when you heal champions. Now, it's only got a chance to start with, and it gets better as you go up to 5-star, but restoring max HP is very niche, but where it's good, it is absolutely amazing. Specifically, in Hydra, it can be very good for lasting longer in a fight because your max HP will wear down, because eventually you will deal with the Decay head, and Decay will chunk away your max HP based on healing. So this is good for that. This is also useful for the Sand Devil, especially if you're using the Godseeker Sand Devil team. This is a way to make sure that Godseeker keeps herself healed and alive. Now, it doesn't need to be too high anymore. It used to have to be at least a 3-star and preferably a 5-star in some cases. Now a 3-star is just fine, and even a 1-star will probably do the job well enough on a Godseeker. But it is still a useful one on healers, specifically if you're going to use them in Hydra or other content where max HP damage actually happens. Dark Resolve is just not great. Increasing damage based on the number of dead allies. This damage increase is not particularly great. There are better damage increases, even for a champion that's going to be soloing with 4 food. That is 20% damage on a 6-star. There are better ones for any champion other than possibly some rares. Not a good one. I would advise against taking Dark Resolve. Phantom Touch is one of the ones that gets taken a lot. Phantom Touch basically does a bonus attack that is damage based on attack, and depending on how high you have it, you get possibly even an extra chance of that activating and just a better chance of it activating overall. Phantom Touch is a good one for most rares that are going to be dealing damage, and honestly, any rare where an extra hit could be a helpful thing to have on them. So if you're putting them in Fire Knight, you're putting them in other content, and they're built to do some damage, that becomes a very good one for a lot of rares. It's honestly the default one I use for most rares, because there's rarely a better rare one for most rares. That said, it actually can be very useful on some epics and legendaries as well. It's actually a good one for clan boss to have on any champion that doesn't have something else that's going to affect the clan boss run in a better way. So I think I have 3 champions on my team in my clan boss that have Phantom Touch, and then the other 2 have other ones that we'll certainly get to later. Hero's Soul is generally, honestly, only good if you're dealing with needing to max out damage against the spider, because it's per additional enemy, but that doesn't creep up that hard until you get into spider, where that can be 33-35%. Even then, not great. Generally not good other than very niche circumstances where you need that extra damage for the spider boss specifically. Faultless Defense is actually kind of a fun one. It got buffed recently where it reflects damage slightly with then people that do increased defense. Now, reflect damage is not a great damage dealer, and you'll see here 3% of damage reflected. It goes all the way up to 15%. You don't take enough damage where even 15% of the damage you take is going to be significant in any content other than maybe arena, and even then probably not great. That said, what this is actually good for is this becomes an extra hit against the Fire Knight shield. So if you have somebody with increased defense and you put this on them against Fire Knight, if the Fire Knight takes a turn, you are going to chunk away up to 5 additional attacks against the Fire Knight shield. So this is very good on a Martyr, for example, if you're using a counterattack team in Fire Knight hard. And honestly, for Fire Knight normal, if you have increased defense available, like if you're bringing a Mithrala into your Fire Knight team, which is not a horrible idea, well, she's got increased defense. Faultless Defense with this, she'll keep that increased defense up, and every time the shield goes down, you've got 4 or 5 hits towards bringing that shield down a lot faster, so that can be very, very helpful. Emergency Heal is actually a really good one for solo champions. If you have a champion that either puts a shield on themselves automatically, like a Eurost, for example, or a Lana Tharl does that, for example, this can be very helpful. If you don't, well, this is where Blood Shield equipment can come in. Blood Shield's one of the special rings and special amulets you can get from the clan versus clan, and having it doesn't matter if it's a good or a bad one, but having one of these on a champion that you expect to be taking a lot of damage and want them to survive, this gives them a good chunky bonus heal whenever they take damage. This is also really good on, say, a Vergis who puts a shield up on himself as part of his passive fairly regularly. So those are good places to put that. That'll give them additional healing. Now, 3% isn't huge, but basically the shield took some damage and then they heal 3%. And if they put a shield right back on themselves, well, that's just extra HP to give you a better margin of error. Once you get up to like this 9%, it becomes pretty big. 15% is huge at the 6-star here. Honestly, 3 stars mostly good. It's not a ton, but sometimes 3 or 6% extra healing over the run of a long fight can be pretty huge overall. So Emergency Heal is actually a pretty solid one for champions that can use this shield mechanic. Survival Instinct is very, very niche. The problem with Survival Instinct is the turn meter boost is whenever they debuff a sprite or transferred onto them. It only occurs once per enemy turn, so you only get the bonus once, even though there's multiple debuffs. But you know, technically for every enemy turn, you can get some turn meter boosts. This one's just not that great. The turn meter boost isn't super good until you get to level 6. That said, the level 6 version of this can be kind of fun for countering champions like a Nell, for example, that might put poisons on you despite the fact you having other things on there. The problem is you're still going to get the debuffs, which means you're going to be debuffed when you go into your turn, which is not great. So generally, I'd rather find ways to avoid the debuffs. And if they're control debuffs, well, your turn goes faster and you get rid of the control turn by missing a turn, but there are better blessings to get rid of that in general. Nourish is one I actually kind is very useful for anybody that puts out continuous heals regularly. Now, continuous heals don't necessarily trigger the miracle heal stuff. I'm not 100% sure on that. Sometimes people say they do, sometimes they don't. But what continuous heal buffs do is they heal your champions, and you're getting extra healing on those continuous heals. And of course, it restores max HP with the continuous heal as well. So what I like this on is on rare champions that throw continuous heal out. This is a great way to give them additional utility, because you'll actually help with max HP in a couple of situations where that's a problem, but you give them much better healing with those continuous heals. And continuous heals are a good healing mechanic, but it requires people to take a turn. So the more healing you can get with a continuous heal, the better a continuous heal is overall. So I like this one. Nature's Bounty is another good one, very good on rare debuffers. Basically, it has a good chance of taking a low-level debuff and turning it into the high-level debuff. Now, they're very specific. Poison, decrease attack, decrease speed, decrease defense, decrease resistance. But it does not apply to gear sets, by the way, so do be aware of that. So toxic gear is not something you get big boy poisons with this, although I don't understand why. That seems weird. But it is only a 15% chance early on, 30% chance later, and a 60% chance later on. That said, you'll hear Bellower mentioned a lot, because Bellower throws a ton of these debuffs up there, and Bellower is a great champion to get this on, because Bellower is a great champion in general. You're going to want a high blessing on him, and if you're building him with enough accuracy to land these debuffs, you might as well have a 45% chance or a 60% chance to get the greater version of that debuff. And even if you don't get the greater one, you still get the lesser one. So it really is going to depend on whether or not a champion has enough of these debuffs to make it worthwhile for this to be the right one for your team. But if you're relying on, say, a Hellborn Sprite to put Weaken on the boss, well, this could actually help her place the big boy Weaken as opposed to the little boy Weaken. That could help everyone else do more damage, which might be better than simply putting something like a Phantom Touch where she just gets additional damage, but it's only her attack additional damage. So that's kind of where the rare ones fall. There are certain legendaries that might make some of these useful, but honestly, most epics don't have this problem for him. And, legendaries definitely shouldn't be placing the little versions of any of this stuff. All right, now we talk about the epic ones, and the epic ones open up epic champions as an option, but honestly, there's some legendaries that can take some of these ones too. Iron Well decreases the damage that this champion receives according to the number of debuffs on them. I hate this one because I don't want to get debuffed. And if I am debuffed, I might have decreased defense, which means I'm taking more damage than normal anyway. Plus, this damage reduction is minimal. Absolutely minimal. Do not take Iron Will. It's probably one of the worst ones in the game, right? Heavencast, on the other hand, is very good. It's almost the opposite of Iron Will. Increase the damage inflicted by this champion according to the buffs on them. This is great for a lot of champions, particularly if you run in buff-heavy teams, which a lot of people tend to for Hydra. And it, again, is a flat damage boost. 2% per buff, that can be up to a 20% buff, but it can go to a 5 buff on the level 1 and a 10 on the level 3. So you can get this to do a lot of buffs and a lot of extra damage. Very good overall. That said, there are better ones for some champions than Heavencast, so you're going to have to I'll talk about that one a little later when I get to it, but there's one of them where you're going to kind of have to make the decision, is this better or is Heavencast better? Cruelty is one of my favorite defaults for most champions when I don't know what else to do with them, and that's because Cruelty decreases the defense of people that you're fighting. It is best on AoE champions. I like it on champions that already put decreased defense and that's their thing, but anybody that has lots of AoEs can do this very effectively. Geomancer is actually a really good one because his A1 is an AoE, so I actually like to put this one on Geomancer, and basically removing the defense of your target is huge, and it's less effective against bosses, but it is still absolutely huge. And just to kind of give you an idea of how important this one can be, on my, to be fair, endgame, one king, just about everything, Bat Eater team, I got a 3-star soul for my Man Eater over a 2-star soul I had previously, and I put Cruelty on him to the 3-star instead of the 2-star. And that difference of 5% less defense over the course of the battle added 10 million damage to my clan boss run. Brought it up from about 100 million to 110 to 115 million. That was huge, and I was actually really surprised with how much extra damage that provided. So, especially over long-term fights, having champions that can throw this out there, and this is great against Hydra, this is great against Chimera, this is great against any long-term battle, and even boss battles where you're going to be taking more than one turn. Just that extra decreased defense, decreasing defense, ignoring defense are the best ways to do damage in high-level content. Lethal Dose is a PvP 1. As you'll see, it only works in arena and siege battles, and basically increases the damage that you do with poison. And this is basically the only way poison champions can be viable in arena. So there's only champions that you're going to want to put this on are champions that you plan on using in PvP or siege and have poison. And if you're not in those two categories, this is wasted. So don't put this on your Bad Alcazar, for example, thinking that it's going to help him solo Dragon. It's not. It doesn't do anything in PvE other than siege, which is kind of PvP. Commanding Presence strengthens your team's aura. This is good for epics that have good auras that you want to increase, or if you just don't have anything else that makes a lot of sense for them. There's a lot of revivers I think that this can be very good on in the game for faction wars, for example, because, you know, this is a decent amount of extra stats you get from an aura, which can be good extra stats. Now, it's not absolutely amazing, but if you already have somebody with cruelty, and to be fair, cruelty doesn't stack with multiple champions. You hit the maximum you can hit for this across basically anything that does this decreased defense effect. So, you know, rather than having multiple people with that decreased defense, well, give one of them Commanding Presence. Makes some sense. Chainbreaker has started to become a meta one for arena because it has a chance of basically ignoring your stuns, your freezes, your sleeps, provokes, fears, true fears, and petrifications. And the higher you get this, the better chance you get of basically removing these. Since it is removed at the start of the turn, the enemy doesn't necessarily know if it's actually going to hold or not. It can literally just proc and suddenly you have your turn when the enemy doesn't expect you to have your turn, which can be absolutely amazing. It is only a 25% chance, but you do get the extra turn meter as well out of this when you get hit with these debuffs as well. So there's basically, if you do lose your turn, you've still gotten some extra turn meter out of it, which means you get to go through it faster. And, you know, it's a very good way to keep your nices, for example, out of control. And in PvP, where shrugging off these controls can be absolutely critical, this can be a good, but it does really need to be a higher level. You really need this to be at least at the 3-star. 10% is not great. Not that 15 is that much better, but at least it's a 15. And it only maxes out at 25, so it's not even that great. But it is still very critical in the current meta. Crushing Rend is great, but it's very, very specific. Anything less than a 6-star version of this is a 1 or 2 shot extra ignore defense. So for Seer, for example, any level of Crushing Rend is great on your Seer because you're building Seer for a wave clear and you want her ignore defense. So getting any level of this should help her clear the wave in one hit, and she won't need the issue of the fact that this doesn't last more than one attack. That said, it gets better and you eventually get more hits, and eventually 6-star, you get unlimited hits with this. And that's where this becomes broken on a lot of endgame champions. Now, Hydra, for example, is level 350 at Nightmare. So that means you are ignoring 35% extra defense, and it's happening on every attack. As I mentioned before, ignoring defense, the best way to do damage in high-end PvP and PvE, while 35% extra ignore defense is huge. That is where if you ever see, for example, Toshiro doing billions of damage or Trunda's doing billions of damage, that is part of what is going on with them. Somebody has a 6-star soul on those champions, and they are able to use that 6-star soul to ignore so much defense that they are just doing boatloads and boatloads of damage. Plus, of course, they're getting all these extra stats as well. Seer with this is absolutely amazing, and her A1 becomes absolutely deadly with this as well. You get her in 25 to 30 to 35% ignore defense, plus you get another 35% here. You are now ignoring 70. You put her in Helm Smasher, you're at 95% chance to ignore defense, which means you're basically doing pure damage. And it's absolutely amazing. And that's just talking about Seer. You talk about other champions as well. That is a great way to do damage. Now, it takes 2 hits for level 5. You know, it is every hit at level 6. This has some use in PvP as well. It's only 6% in PvP because champions are level 60. But you know what? 6% extra ignore defense doesn't suck in some cases. Now, this is more of an epics are going to use this. So this is where you might see Phoenixes with Crushing Rend because they hit really hard on that A1. If you have a bunch of other ignore defense and plus 6 extra, there's a good chance that Phoenix might actually be able to kill you with that A1, which could be pretty bad for you. Incinerate is basically similar to the poison version. It's the HP burn version of the increased damage in arena and siege. So if you're using arena burner or siege burners, this is great. If you're not using that champion in arena or siege, this will do absolutely nothing for you. Otherwise, it increases the burn damage by a pretty significant amount. And it does extra turn meter in decreasing as well if you get to level 6. Pretty gross in PvP under the right scenarios, such as a Sulfurion or a Gizmak or a Volcanos are probably the big 3 for Incinerate. But other champions that bring HP burn that you might want to bring into arena for whatever reason, Incinerate could be pretty helpful for you. I really don't like Neutralize. Now, this is not to say Neutralize is horrible, but Neutralize basically has a chance to ignore the weak hits for placing debuffs on Poison Cloud. And honestly, I think what they should probably do is just have it literally have a chance to ignore Poison Cloud, and that will make it much better. Because the problem is, 10% chance to place debuffs on weak hits against enemies under Poison Cloud is nothing. 20% is still nothing. I would much rather have other things on the champion. I would much rather have cruelty on a champion, for example, with AoEs, or some champions like an Ugo. I might actually like the ability to reduce the max HP damage, so I might actually prefer a miracle heal on an Ugo, for example. So at 60% chance even, at the 6-star, just doesn't feel like that does anything of merit. So yeah, don't like Neutralize. I think it needs a buff. Now, I talked about Heaven Cast, and I talked about the other one that you need to consider, and Nature's Wrath is the other one you need to consider. Nature's Wrath is kind of the go-to buff for debuffing nukers. So if you have a nuker that also needs accuracy because they need to place good debuffs, so this is where like your Vlad could come in, or your Thor is actually a really good example. Your Tholin's pretty good with this one as well because he's got the weaken on the A1. It basically gives you bonus damage, and it starts off at 2%, maxes out at 6, eventually becomes 2%, maxes out at 8, but this is on absolutely every ability used beyond words. So that means that unlike Heaven Cast, which to be fair is 2% per buff you have on you, once you get to level 6, this is the equivalent of having 4 buffs on you constantly, but you don't even have to have the buffs up for this to be good once you've triggered this. So basically, as this triggers, it lasts for the rest of the fight, which is why this is so much better. And once you get to a 5-star, it becomes 15%. And once this becomes a 6-star, it's a 30%. That is absolutely outstanding ways to increase the damage of your champion. And to be fair, I ran a test between Tholin and Thor, and Thor did more damage than Tholin, but the difference, well, there's 7% of the difference in damage right there. That's actually a pretty big deal. So, adding 7% to Tholin, more damage he might have done, well, that might have actually made the margin significantly smaller. Plus, Tholin's missing other stuff as well. And I mentioned that in that video, so I didn't discount that. But just keep in mind that Nature's Wrath, probably one of the best blessings that I've released in a while for a lot of really good debuffing nuking champions. So finally, we're at the legendary ones. The legendary ones, very involved, but they are great for your legendaries, obviously good for your mythicals as well. Intimidating Presence is basically very similar to the other aura one, except for it also weakens your enemy team's aura. So if you have a legendary, do this one instead of Commanding Presence. Commanding Presence is no longer going to be useful for you. This is great on any champion with a good aura, or any champion on a team that will have an aura. So I use this on my Arbiter, for example. You'll see this on my Ostrate as well. And I believe this can actually, it says that it says only one can work. So you can't actually stack this with Intimidating Presence and Commanding Presence, unfortunately. But having this is huge, especially because weaken enemy aura by 20% and strengthen yours by 35%. Well, when you're talking a 30% increased speed aura in arena, that's a major swing in speed. So just be aware of how good this one is and look for champions to throw it on. Lightning Cage is great as well. Lightning Cage basically gives you a chance to protect your buffs from being stolen. Basically, every time the enemy buffs, you get a lightning orb stack. Every time a lightning orb stacks have a 50% chance of protecting random buffs from being stolen, removed, or transferred. So this is another way you can protect your stone skin or other buffs that you don't want to lose against bosses as well as against non-bosses. Plus, it does add extra damage because when you get all three of them, when you get to level 6, you can do a bunch of extra damage to your enemy with this lightning orb as well. So this is one of the meta ones to add to champions that are going to have stone skin, for example, that are going to have a lot of blessings. Lightning Cage is a very common one you will see in Arena nowadays on anybody that has blessings that you don't want to lose those blessings. Temporal Chains is a fun one, and it actually works in PvE as well as PvP, but it's more of a PvP focused one. Basically, the enemy's speed gets decreased for every active buff they're on, depending on how big this is. But 6% speed decrease, 9% speed decrease, 15% speed decrease, and turn meter decrease when they have extra buffs. That's huge. That is a big game changer in Arena. So getting temporal chains on a champion can be great. Not only that, but this actually does work against Hydra. It's one of the few ways you can actually decrease the speed of Hydra outside of just decreased speed debuffs. So this works on any boss because they are not immune to this speed decrease from this blessing, even if they are immune to other speed decreases. Ward of the Fallen is part of why the current event dungeon with Curiosa is absolutely busted, because at level 6, this adds a bunch of extra decreased damage bone armors, and when you attack, they do a bunch of bonus damage. And because this is a boss, her attack is huge, and she gets a bunch of damage with this bone armor. This is a very good one for champions that you want to have some extra survivability, and you want them to be able to do some extra damage at the top level. Specifically, this is really good on a Rhodos, because Rhodos has the ability where he will drop some of his damage when he cannot take more than 50% damage on a single attack, and Ward of the Fallen eats into that. So Ward of the Fallen can require a Rhodos to be 3-hit instead of 2-hit in some cases. I don't think they have fixed that yet, and I don't know if they intend to fix that. But that is a good one on Rhodos, but can be very good on a lot of other champions that you want to have some extra survivability, as well as possibly do some extra damage occasionally if you got the 6-star version of it. However, do keep in mind that unless you have the 6-star version of this, these bone armors will slowly but surely dwindle down at some point in time. And they don't help against poisons and HP burns, for example. Life Harvest is actually a really good meta ability. These stack. So multiple champions with Life Harvest is not bad. Basically, when people revive, they lose max HP. That is a great way to help keep down enemies that keep reviving. It's one of the ways you can counter a Sun Wukong, because if he becomes so squishy that he's so easy to defeat that even your revivers can hit him in one hit, well, then you've got a better chance of surviving and then killing him when he comes back around. But on top of that, higher levels of this give turn meter boosts as well. So for example, I like to run this on Narcissus because Narcissus kills people and can even block revive, but if they get revived again, it actually helps him get additional turn meter so he can go before the people that revived and just smack them down again, and it's easier for him to kill them. And in Narcissus' case specifically, this is a good counter to the Taurus and Marichka. Now, Taurus does not lose damage based off this max HP, but Marichka loses some of that max HP, making her easier to kill. Taurus still loses the max HP, so he's still easier to kill. He's just won't lose some of the damage like he should, unfortunately. But the turn meter boost means that everyone revives at once. You might have your nuker go again because he might get 30% turn meter boost for each enemy that revived. That's 90% if 3 people revived. Soul Reap is a very good generic nuker default. Why? Because in PvE, this has a chance to just basically flat out kill a boss when you don't quite have enough damage to kill him otherwise. Basically, if the champion that you just hit has a threshold of whatever this happens to be, you'll get a Reaper that'll show up and try to do that exact amount of max HP damage. Now, he'll ignore defense as well, so things that prevent ignore defense resist stuff can actually prevent the Reaper from actually killing somebody. So Harima, for example, actually kind of nullifies this to some extent. Stone Skin certainly nullifies this as well because it won't hit through Stone Skin. So if you kill somebody from under Stone Skin mostly, but don't quite kill them, the Reaper will just smack against the Stone Skin. So in endgame Arena, this is lost some of its luster, but for early game Arena where you're not fighting a ton of Stone Skin, this is great. For things like Spider, where you may actually want to be able to kill him if you didn't quite get him down, this is great. This is reliable in some builds to where you can rely on that to come in and finish a boss if you have everything else planned out properly. There are Fire Knight teams that are based around having Reaper on a Newt, where Newt will hit, do enough damage to almost kill the boss, and then Reaper finishes him off. Reaper is a great one to pick on some nukers. Just keep in mind, you should certainly look and see if there are other ones that might make more sense, such as ones that give permanent damage increases to everything the champion does, because there is a cooldown. I think it's a 3 or 4 turn cooldown on the Reaper as well, so it's not going to trigger absolutely every time you do anything. And in fact, it doesn't tell you, which is very annoying. But, you know, Reaper is great, but once you've blown a Reaper, it takes a few turns before you have a Reaper available again. That said, Reaper can trigger on multiple champions as well, and I have won several PvE fights as well as some PvP waves. I have won some PvP fights as well as some PvE waves because I have had multiple Soul Reapers crop and finish off the enemy. Sheep, the legendary, really frustrating one. Sheep is really good in arena for disrupting your enemy team. That's the only place Sheep is really good. In fact, Sheep is actually a detriment in some cases if you're doing a PvE wave, because the sheep, well, once you have to kill the sheep, they come back and they come back partially healed. So from that perspective, it's kind of annoying. But sheep is very disruptive. It is very good on a lot of champions. It is nice to have it a 6-star because a 6-star means you don't need, it is irresistible. So is a 5-star, which means you don't need accuracy to place it. You do need accuracy on the lower levels. So having a champion that has a good chance of triggering or basically being a target of being attacked, sheep is a good option for you. But as there have become more and more counters for sheep, including things like the rod that can throw sheep back at you, or intercept, stacks can certainly prevent sheep as well. Sheep has slowly become a little less popular in arena, fortunately. It is still worth considering on arena-based champions that have high accuracy. For example, it can be good on a Fabian, for example, for a lot of people. It can be good on an Armands, who can play into the sheep even more because Armands also gets other benefits when somebody gets sheeped as well. So there are reasons that sheep could be good on certain champions regardless, but sheep is not the end-all, be-all of blessings that it used to be. It is still very powerful in endgame arena. Brimstone is a great one to have on at least one champion on a lot of teams where you have somebody with high accuracy, because Brimstone gives a huge max HP damage that can do a ton of damage to bosses. It's one of the great ways to chunk away things like Amius. It is really good in clan boss. It can add a ton of damage to clan boss. It can be useful in Hydra. It can be useful all over the place. The problem with Brimstone is that it is not 100%. Other than if you get it to level 6. It is not protected until you get to level 5, which means that it can be cleansed as a normal thing otherwise. And the cooldown is 4 turns for a specific champion to place it, but sometimes champions will try to place it when there's another one up there, and you can only have one active at a time. So particularly for AoE champions, it can place on if you're playing against Hydra, it can place on a head that is not going to be able to process Brimstone. So Brimstone has kind of lost its luster a little bit in Hydra on endgame teams. It still doesn't mean it's bad to have, but it means that it's not a reliable source of damage as much as it used to be on lower level. Also, for example, if it happens to process on, for example, the Decay head, and you're controlling that with Provoke, Brimstone will never proc. So that's another problem with it as well. That said, Brimstone is a ton of damage. It is very good on champions for a lot of PvE content. It is useful in Sand Devil if you can get it to at least 5-star. It is useful in Shogun just to proc down the boss and do a ton of damage. It is really useful against Amius. It's one of the best ways to do damage against Amius. And it is overall a very, very good one to have. I would recommend trying to have it on a champion in your clan boss team, on at least one of them too, because it can add as much as 10 million damage on a normal, unkillable 50-turn run just by proccing some of the time. So Brimstone's pretty good. It's certainly not the end-all be-all blessing. There's several blessings that have come into play that are certainly better than Brimstone is now. Cracking Roots is an interesting one. And basically, if you don't have Cracking Roots at least a 5-star level, it is probably not worth taking. But if you get to this 60% and finally the 100% better on, this becomes possibly interesting, especially if you have the Stonecracker gear or whatever the gear is that's live arena stuff. Not that a lot of people have much of that stuff at all, but if you can stack up the ability to do extra damage to Stone Skin, there is a chance some of your champions can actually blow through Stone Skin on their first hit. and actually just flat out nuke it. That said, I think that these numbers need to be significantly higher to really make this worthwhile. I think this should be 40, 80, 120, and 200%. I really do, particularly because this is a wasted blessing if you don't have anybody against Stone Skin other than the stats. So you're making a choice to be PvP focused and hoping they have Stone Skin. And if they don't have Stone Skin, you're losing out quite a bit. So yeah, could this be better? Yeah. Is it still useful? There are certain champions that this is really good on, certain meta champions where Cracking Roots shows up with a 5 or a 6 star. You actually may have to consider banning that person because otherwise there's a good chance they are just going to kill your entire team before you take a turn, aka Hegemons. Finally, Harmonic Impulse I think is honestly pretty trash. So you only get the benefit of this if they lose a turn from Fear or True Fear, and there's a chance of it decreasing the cooldown of a skill that you lose based off of a True Fear debuff. I'd honestly rather take the rare or epic ones that either prevent it from being placed in the first place, that's like a Indomitable Spirit, or Chainbreaker, where I have got a 25% chance of just getting rid of it in the first place. A 25% chance of getting rid of True Fear in the first place is better than a slight turn meter boost if I lose my turn, considering I still only have a 50% chance of losing my turn anyway. So the end result is this is a better mitigation for True Fear than this one, and this is a legendary blessing. I think honestly, if Harmonic Impulse was actually swapped with Indomitable Spirit, or Indomitable Spirit gave you a chance to get that extra turn meter boost with the thing, it being a rare one, it suddenly becomes more interesting. And then if that became a legendary one, well, it would need a bit of a buff to be better. But if this was suddenly a 10, 20, 30, 60% chance of removing the debuff, in fact, at a 60% chance I'd put that cooldown back, that's not bad. So there you go. That is a long talking head video about blessings, which ones are useful, some of the champions you might want to put them on. Hey, let me know if you have any questions about some of these blessings. Let me know if you think I could certainly cover certain champions with the blessings better. Honestly, there are so many champions in this game. It is better to learn about the blessings to be able to make a decision yourself, or to look up a guide about a specific champion to see options that might be good for that specific champion. But I'm certainly open to trying to be a little more open to pushing certain champions' value for certain blessings as well. So hopefully this taught you something. Hopefully this helps you get those blessings working. They are absolutely important. They are a ton of stats, and they are a ton of ways to power up your champions. And it's honestly, a good blessing on a champion can turn a champion from a good champion to a great champion. And in some cases, it can turn a bad champion into a great champion. It's pretty impressive. So appreciate any feedback you have on it as well. You guys are absolutely amazing. Hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. Hopefully you have a wonderful day. And until the next video, I am Bront CatHerder.